Tywin Lannister schemed, backstabbed, broke laws, cultural norms, religious taboos, destroyed anyone who was in his path, all for the singular purpose of ensuring that his family and therefore his legacy survives, only for him to fail miserably in the end. But why? Why is it that someone like Tywin, someone who is intelligent, has a single purpose in mind, and is ruthlessly pursuing it as harshly as he is, why does he fail? Well, because we all have a fatal flaw in the end. Or at least we do in fiction. And that is something that George R. R. Martin loves to play with. Everyone in this series has a goal. They have something that they are working towards, but they all have that internal struggle, that fatal flaw, that thing that gets in the way of them getting what they actually want and, becomes the source of conflict. And Tywin is no different. For all the skills that he has, for all the personality traits that would enable him to be able to do what he wants to do, he can't outrun his fatal flaw, the thing that will always get in the way of him getting what he wants and ultimately become his undoing. And that, of course, is Tywin Lannister's pride. Get it? His pride, because he's a line, because it's a pun. It's a bad pun, but it's a pun, okay? Like, you're a critic now? Something that's interesting about Tywin, though, and ultimately kind of tragic, is it's that fatal flaw, that pride, and therefore that insecurity within him that pushes him towards this goal of elevating his family, and also prevents him from fully realizing it. And it's not hard to understand why Tywin is the way he is. Tywin is responding to the previous generation, to his own father, to his father's own struggles, and overcorrecting when he is in charge. Which ultimately I think is a theme throughout most of this series, where we watch each subsequent generation try to correct the mistakes of the past, and then whoopsie-doo, we have gone to the far end of the spectrum, created a new set of problems that our kids then try to fix by swinging back the other direction. And Tywin's no different. Tywin's father, Titos, was bad at his job, to be perfectly frank. As the Lord of Casterly Rock, as the Warden of the West, he was bad. He wasn't a good manager. He wasn't a good administrator. He didn't care that much. I mean, he did care, but he cared about people liking him. He cared about getting along with everyone. He wanted everyone to be, at peace and having a good time. And ultimately, that led to him being kind of a pushover. And as far as fatal flaws go, okay, it's not the worst one for Titos. You want everyone to get along, you don't want to engage in a bunch of fights. I can relate to that to a degree, but he really does it so much that it becomes a problem. Other families start taking advantage and actively causing harm to House Lannister, to the point where House Lannister might not exist if these other families, keep growing in power and then, try to off them, which the Rains and the Tarbecks eventually do try to do before Tywin puts them down. Made a whole video about the Rains of Castamere and all that, but Tywin, this is where his ruthlessness first comes out, because those families are disrespecting his to such a wild degree because his father has let them. And on top of that, his father is doing a lot of things that are just a bad look. He brings his mistress into Casterly Rock and starts allowing her to dress with Tywin's mother's old things, her jewelry, etc., which, that's not something that you would typically advertise, is all I'm saying. And so once Titos passes away and Tywin is in charge, his goal is to reverse the damage that his father has done, to instill a sense of authority back into House Lannister and rebuild their reputation, which has fallen by the wayside. As I said earlier, he overcorrects. He does too much. He becomes so single-minded in his pursuit of elevating his and his family's status that he ends up creating new problems that he has to overcome and that eventually will catch up with him. In an ironic twist of fate, most of Tywin's problems that he would face and that his children would face all can be traced back to a lot of his actions. Tywin's initial falling out with Aerys the Mad King, which led to a whole slew of issues, starts because Tywin is doing too much. Tywin is so good at his job, is doing so much in his job, is running the country like a frickin' drill sergeant, to the point where people start noticing and being like, hey, I don't think Aerys is really the king. Tywin is the one who's in charge. And don't you know, crazy old Aerys didn't like that and started getting paranoid more and more so towards Tywin because of that, because he thought Tywin is trying to show off, which to a degree he kind of was. I'm like, yeah, showing off by being good at your job is typically not a bad thing, but that drive, that urge that he feels trying to correct the issues with his father, that insecurity that he has, is what leads to this issue with Aerys. And then that spirals way out of control, because that leads to the fundamental messing up of the psyches of both Cersei Lannister and Jaime Lannister. Jaime ends up being invited to join the Kingsguard because he has pushed Aerys so far, and their relationship has deteriorated to the point where Aerys is now trying to actively hurt Tywin by, making his heir, Jaime, a part of the Kingsguard, and therefore unable to inherit Casterly Rock and all of Tywin's titles. And instead, meaning that Tyrion would be the one to do it, which for Aerys is a huge insult that he's giving to Tywin. Meanwhile with Cersei, because Tywin had been pushing for her to marry Rhaegar, because again, he's trying to elevate, he wants the status, he wants his daughter to be the queen, he wants to be the grandfather to future kings. But because he does that with Cersei, because he plants that thought in Cersei's head, when Aerys, no longer liking him, is like, haha, absolutely not, Cersei is crushed. And that disappointment festers and eventually grows into a bunch of other fun things. Even Tyrion, Tywin's hate of Tyrion, in no small part, is the fact that Tyrion at this point kind of should be the one inheriting, and Tywin, I think he treats Tyrion very badly, but in a way, Tywin kind of has a point here that he doesn't want Tyrion to inherit. Up until the beginning of the storyline in the books, Tyrion has not showed that he is a serious person. He drinks, he goes to the brothels, he does all this stuff that Tywin thinks probably sounds suspiciously like his own father. The happy-go-lucky guy that just is joking and everyone wants to play around. That's Tyrion over here, but not looking how Tywin would want him to on top of things. And so as the story progresses, his decisions get more and more ruthless as he is trying to control a situation that is spiraling out of hand, and he starts making decisions that have long-term implications that he can't foresee. This comment asks, can you please talk about how not smart he is? Tywin is just a ruthless cheater in war. And I don't fully agree, but I also don't fully disagree here. Tywin, in his pursuit of making sure that his family is elevated, does more and more ruthless things. Towards the end of Robert's Rebellion, after he sat the whole thing out, he engages just at the very end to sack King's Landing and massacre that entire city, all in the name of now supporting the people who he thinks are going to be in charge next, the Baratheons. But that causes a problem. His ruthlessness, the way that he conducted himself, makes the North fully distrust him going forward. And that animosity is going to survive into the modern day and eventually help contribute to the start of the War of the Five Kings. And then he has to deal with that. And then the War of the Five Kings, he tries to end through the Red Wedding. Even that is going to become a long-term issue, because yes, it fixes the immediate threat to his family, to his legacy in the short term, but long-term, it causes so much of the realm to fully turn against him. This piece that he has wrangled through dishonest and messed up ways, because remember, breaking of guest right is not just a cultural taboo, it's also considered a religious taboo. They think that you are cursed if you ever do that. And I can't say that I disagree when we see how things go for him going forward. The fact that he breaks guest right in order to succeed, in order to conduct the Red Wedding, means that the Lannisters have fully lost the respect of multiple kingdoms in Westeros. No one trusts them going forward. Everything thinks that they are shady going forward, and it's ultimately going to be the undoing of his family. If Tywin hadn't done so much extra, if he had just acted like a normal, competent lord, he probably would have ensured the success of his family going forward. He probably would have succeeded in marrying Cersei off to Rhaegar. He probably would have succeeded in raising Jaime up to, take over for him after he was gone. There wouldn't have been the need for his moves in Robert's Rebellion or the War of the Five Kings, and he would probably not be, sitting on the toilet with an arrow through him. So, yeah. Good night, y'all.